Thanks, Janet. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you for taking your Saturday afternoon to share your experience and insights.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. For anyone who has just joined us, today's episode is with Miss Wendy McDonald, and she's actually going to share in her episode premiere about a consistent message that she learned from a leader when she was in a FMCG brand, and how it helped to actually ride over the brand crisis and even transform the brand. So we are very glad to have Wendy here with us, sharing not only the insights from her previous FMCG experience, but also her vast L&D experience. And we'll probably chat a little bit more about the trends that she's seeing currently. So Wendy, I think when we recorded the episode, it was, I think, more than 1 month ago. Have you seen any changes that's been happening in the L&D area?
Well, actually, definitely, as we move from, the whole lockdown, and as people are slowly moving on to, the different phases of the economy and the country opening up. So I think I'm seeing more from a leadership standpoint. And I was reading in a study that was done by Leadership Think Tank that leaders are actually facing a couple of different paradoxes. One is, should I go fast or should I go slow? Based on, how information is coming up, it changes every day. And then the second one is, do I go high tech, but am I at risk of losing the human touch, right? And then the third paradox is, I know empathy is important because, everyone is going through change, right? And they are managing work and life at the same time. But how do I show empathy, but also give that tough love to ensure that productivity is still there, there's still accountability? And then at the same time, the other one is, how do I ensure that the fourth paradox is, flexibility, right? Because as people move out, they're realizing that flexible work arrangements are possible. And this might change the entire landscape of how people are looking at, do I really go to an office? Is it more productive for some of my workers to work remotely, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times in a week? So how do I balance between flexibility and yet also giving some sense of control? How will I manage performance in the new world? So I believe that, when it comes to learning and development, a lot of leaders are also looking, because right now leaders are, they're naked, right? It's for all this, they're stripped off of everything. And this is where I think leaders will emerge. Those who are what we call, lead learners. They are the ones that are able to show their vulnerability, that I don't know anything, but, I understand and I'm very clear how people are feeling in these times. How am I feeling in these times? Such that, I can then determine how can I learn? How can I get my organization to also learn with me, to create that open space such that we are all able to manage life, work in this new world.
Right. Interesting with the 4 paradoxes. And then before we went live, I think we were also chatting that coaching sessions has also increased. So what are some of the questions that most of the leaders who get coached would ask?
I think it's quite similar to, the 4 paradoxes. And I think that's why it's so relevant. The first one is decision-making.
Right.
Like, how do I make decisions right now, right, with the fluidity? The second one also is, how do I ensure engagement? In fact, that's one of the top questions. How can I still engage my staff, my organization, even though we are going towards high tech? So I think these 2 questions, decision-making, engagement, have become one of the top questions that are in leaders' minds during our coaching sessions.
I see. Now, so what are some of the techniques that you share, if you could share with us, on how you would advise leaders to engage their employees and at the same time balance the paradox about tough love, like you mentioned?
Yeah, I think it is now quite critical. I mean, there are 2 things. One is, as a leader, first, a lot of times people think that, I'm a leader, so I need to show that I've got everything in control, right? But I think one way is for a leader to first ask themselves, reflect, right? What's going on in me right now? How am I feeling? And how are my people feeling? Because when you know what's going on within yourself, and you're able to just spend just 1-2 minutes to reflect, if this is how I'm feeling, is this how my people are feeling? Then when you show up, whether in communicating anything or making decisions, there is empathy there. But at the same time, you also need to ensure that you are able to speak firmly but with kindness, when you need them to, because business still goes on. So you still need to put in the controls. You still need them to show up in terms of accountability, in terms of ownership. So I think when leaders are able to show up with that empathy, it immediately encourages, I think, engagement. And I think it's quite interesting. I attended this webinar, and I think it's an interesting question for leaders to ask yourself, or for all of us to ask ourselves. So much of our day is spent on doing online meetings, video conferences. Now, ask yourself, out of the entire day, what percentage of your time are most of your online meetings purely work focused? What percentage of the time are you actually spending with your colleagues on just having a chat, not talking about work? The usual, your luncheons, where you can just start having more meaningful conversations instead of just work-related, project-related conversations. I think when we find a good balance between both, not only is it good for engagement with your organization and employees, but it's also good for our own mental resilience. Because I think with work and life really coming together, even for ourselves, our relationships, we need to be able to ensure that we're also able to separate between work as well as social, because we're all social creatures anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I think these social creatures and being ability to just connect not only at work but also personally, it's coming up quite frequently in these times. Especially, I think we have been in a much work from home situation for more than 2 months right now. So I think a lot of people are feeling the pressure from it. So now, for those who just joined us, welcome. We have Ms. Wendy McDonald from Influence Solutions here with us this afternoon actually. Thank you for taking your time here with us, Wendy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's good to be here, Janet.
So Wendy actually has more than 2 decades of experience in FMCG, in companies like, I think, P&G, L'Oreal. And we realized when we were actually chatting during the interview, we were from the same industry. She was in Olympus and I was in Johnson & Johnson, and we were both into laparoscopic, which we call it keyhole surgery as well. So it's quite interesting how the world goes around.
Yes, I would never expect to have found somebody. I mean, in a medical, yes, but purely in laparoscopy, maybe there's a smaller community.
Yes. So that's pretty interesting. So now, for those who join us later, if you would like to key in your questions, you should log into your YouTube account. And if you are coming in from the desktop, please key in the questions actually on the right-hand side of the screen. If you're coming in from your mobile, please key in your questions actually at the bottom of your mobile screen. So Wendy, we are exactly at 2 p.m. right now. So I'll hide you for a little while and we'll play your episode premiere, and we will wait for the questions to come in and get back to the Q&A later.
Sure.
Thank you very much. See you later.
See you.
Hi, welcome to the Leadership During Crisis Online Summit series. Thank you for taking your time to watch these episodes. Please remember to subscribe at our YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook under Leadership During Crisis. Why or what led to the crisis in your organization or department?
Okay, so this was when I was working for a global MNC. And what happened was we had a business crisis. Two of our markets, which account for more than 50% of the overall business revenue, had suddenly nosedived. So because of that, coupled with the fact that we had a new leader that had just joined the company just barely 6 months into this role. And so because you have a business crisis that is looming and you have a new leader that is coming in, it is a cocktail of either we can break through from the crisis or we can sink lower into the crisis.
So now, what brought about that business crisis, if it's okay to share?
Sure. I think there were two components to this. The first one was the fact that the business, or I would say the brand in the two key markets, suddenly the consumers felt that the brand wasn't talking to them anymore. So the younger consumers were not purchasing. And coupled with the fact that, I don't know if you recall, I think it was in 2011, there was that huge Japan earthquake, which led to a tsunami. And then there was a nuclear accident at the Fukushima Daiichi plant. And because the brand manufactures its products in Japan, so there was not just your consumers are not coming to purchase from you, but because of the fact that people felt that, hey, I'm not so sure now if your products are contaminated. And then, it led to this whole perception that I'm not sure if it's safe to purchase these products. So it led to almost like a nosedive in the business for us at that point in time.
So, well, from that perspective, I'm sure there were some crucial steps that were taken then to overcome the crisis, even if the leader was only 6 months into the job.
Yeah, definitely.
What were some of the steps or things that you all did to actually overcome the crisis at the time?
Okay, so I'm just going to share what I felt that leader who was new did, which I witnessed that I felt really turned the situation around. I think firstly, the fact was that even though he was 6 months into the role, throughout the time when he first joined the business, he already started building trust with the organization. And I think as a new leader, it's very important to do that. And I think what also helped was the fact that he didn't come from a beauty brand. He had come from a different category altogether. And so which meant to say that whenever he spoke to people, right, whenever he had conversations with people, he had conversations with a broad spectrum of people because he was trying to really understand, number one, what was going on with the business. Number two, when he was asking questions, it wasn't with the intent to judge or I'm trying to see whether or not my viewpoint is right. He was asking questions with the intent of really seeking to find out, what are you doing in your role? How are you contributing to the business? What can I do to help? So I think that was critical in building trust up front in every conversation that he had with the team. The other very important thing that he did throughout the conversation was, especially when the crisis happened, and he had a completely different way of doing things. The strategy changed completely, and there was definite pushback. But what was important was that throughout the conversations that he had, he was actually prepared for people to ask those tough questions. He was prepared to answer, why did I make this choice? Why am I putting forward this strategy? And not doing it in a very defensive way. It's more of, I really want to understand. And if you ask me that question, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I changed the strategy. The second thing was that he had very clear and focused communication. So at that time, I was in the learning and development side of the business. And I remember in a conversation that I had with him, he had only one clear mission, and it was, we need to increase the number of new users to the brand. That's it. That is that one rallying cry. And so I remember I asked him, why just one? How about those existing customers? What will we do with them? What is the strategy for that? And he told me, Wendy, you must understand that I am dealing with an organization that has more than 5,000-6,000 people. If you include the people at the counters, the people at the manufacturing plants, the local sales teams, product supply, marketing, that's almost 4,000 to 5,000 people. And if I had more than one message, that message might be lost in translation. So I want to make it very clear that there's only one rallying cry. Every decision that anyone makes, no matter which level you are at in the organization, no matter which part of the business you represent, you understand that every decision you make towards that one rallying cry, which is to increase the number of new customers that come into the business. So I think that was the second thing that he did really well to turn kind of the tide. The third thing I remember that he did, which really has now changed the trajectory of how the brand is now marketing itself, is the risk-taking approach. So he tried many different ways to kind of change the perception of the brand, of it being very old, to something that would kind of attract, right, the newer, younger consumers that he was looking to target in that one rallying cry. And I remember he had come up to me and a group of my colleagues, and he showed us this video that he was planning to push out. And he told me, what are your thoughts about it? And then we looked at it, and then we said, controversial, but not too bad, I don't know, it could be a hit or a miss. And I remember he said very clearly, he said, you know what? If you guys don't have any extreme negative, violent objection to it, I am going to go ahead with this video. We're going to launch this. And no matter what happens, whether the result is good, whether the result is bad, I'm going to take full responsibility for that. It was quite interesting because I've never heard a leader verbalize that I am going to take accountability for this. First, he asks you for your feedback, right? What do you think? And he says, okay, great. Now, this is what I'm going to do. And whether the result is good or bad, I'm going to take full ownership and accountability for it. And then he left. He went ahead, he did it. And that video, although controversial, right, it had about 10 million views in 10 days. That also kind of really changed the way that the brand now approaches kind of its brand philosophy. From a more product features and benefits standpoint, it went into a more human branding philosophy. But I think there are two things that he did really well. And I think in every town hall meeting, he always goes back to that, reiterates that rallying cry. But to ensure that there is buy-in, right, because there was pushback, it's a completely different strategy that we had done before. Because what he does is he says the rallying cry, okay, he kind of susses out, listens, like, okay, what's the feedback like, what's going on the ground. And then in the next town hall meeting or in any kind of large-scale event with the team, he then tweaks it, his message. And then he goes in again. Okay, this is why we're doing this. So I think that it is also important as a leader, right? Your communication, because I think he was very, very clear in his head why he was doing it, why he felt that it was necessary to have this change. The second thing he did was, it's almost like I launch this, I say this, I hear what the organization is feeling about it, I get that, okay, I'm going to tweak my communication again. Sometimes we always just stick to that one form of communication because in our heads we say, yes, this is where we need to go. But you must understand that human beings, right, all of us, when it comes to any change, it's not just rational. We have that emotional luggage that we also bring with us into any change. And so I think what he did was he was able to kind of almost like, you're doing risk-taking. You launch something, you experiment. Okay, it doesn't work that way. I'm going to communicate another way. But he brought that to the communication staff. So I would say that, number one, he did that really well. And he took every opportunity at a town hall very seriously. He actually had rehearsals because I knew the communications manager that he worked with. And he really made sure that every town hall he prepared for it because he wanted to ensure that his message was targeted and concise.
What are the key lessons that you have learned that you've brought on into your own entrepreneurial experience in terms of overcoming crisis, like the COVID-19 crisis that we have currently?
So I think the one thing that I learned from him, right, was, you remember he had two things he did really well. One was that single rallying cry, meaning to really take action. And also the second thing was, the way he communicated as well. You observe, you see what's going on, and then you take the action. And so it's kind of similar to fighter pilots. They are actually trained to think, right, with what we call the OODA approach, right? So O meaning you orient yourself first. So you kind of identify what the opportunities, what the problems. And then the other second O after that would be you orient yourself. You identify what are some of the options that are available for you. Then after that, it goes on to D. You decide, right, which option should I take? And then A, you take action. So this OODA approach, I believe, is actually critical as a mindset to have. And it shouldn't come about during just a crisis. Actually, mindsets are things we should be consistently, training our minds. Because they say, right, when shit hits the fan, you sink to, let's say, your natural default style of leading, of thinking, of overcoming things. So I think upfront before that, it's important to already start thinking like that, whether you're in a crisis or not in a crisis. So I thought that OODA approach, which is I'm going to see the surroundings, launch it, take the action, and then tweak it, and then I will come back to OODA again. So almost like a circular way of experimenting.
Hi, Wendy. So it's been a month, I think, we had this conversation.
Yes, it's been a month.
So are you still
Yes.
taking the OODA approach when you are basically speaking with your clients as well as looking at the L&D scenario at the moment?
Yes, I think we are constantly doing that, and I think as a company at Influence Solutions, in fact, we just recently launched, put out a video where we actually talked about how we as a company, when COVID-19, really hit us as a learning and development consultancy, our first instinctive reaction was to pivot online, right? Everything online immediately. And then we realized that we weren't getting the kind of traction that we were expecting. And so what we did was, as we observed, we did the first thing, not traction, not coming in. So we went into the second O, right, which is to orient ourselves. So it also ties in very nicely with the paradox of going fast or slow, right? So we decided to take it slow this time when we take a step back and we started reflecting. And in the video, we actually asked 4 questions in the leadership team. So we asked ourselves, who are our best clients, right? The second question was, what do we excel in at Influence Solutions? All right. And then the third question was, how do we serve our best clients? And then the fourth question was, how do you best serve our clients' ecosystem? And so when we took a step back and slowly answered each of these 4 questions, we were then able to re-strategize again our online offering, take a longer-term approach, deciding that, number one, the purpose of our business, our company, is it still relevant today? And will it still be relevant post-COVID or phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4? Then we also asked ourselves, right, based on the answers to the 4 questions, is our products, how we serve our customers, would it still be valid also post-COVID, phase 1, 2, 3, 4? And I think the answers to those 4 questions really helped us to kind of relook at our strategy and decide how we were going to prioritize our resources, right, our time and our talents. So once we did that, then we were able to move faster because we had options now, and then we could then very much decide what we're going to focus on and then take action on it. And then based on the results of the action we take, it may or may not work. And then we will go back to orientating ourselves again to see how it has changed. And perhaps this is even more important right now. As you know, in our chat, I had talked about how it's just so fluid, right? Lessons are just coming, information is popping. There are changes to what the government policies are. And so as leaders, I think we need to know that we need to be agile, right?
Yes, so definitely. So it's a good approach. And I think with so much changes going on, definitely having to observe, reorientate, and planning for the longer term, it's quite crucial. The other thing I was just wondering, when you were seeking the feedback from your clients as to why your first set of training outlines and all those did not really had traction, what were some of their feedback that you received?
So what happened was when COVID started, right? We immediately went into we we came up with how we could quickly bring everything online. And what we realized is that not everything or all our products could go online, but not all of the topics were essential. And we realized that actually, based on our talking with our clients, our best clients, right? Because that was the first question that we asked ourselves. And the third question which we asked our clients was, how do we best serve our best clients? And we realized that what they really needed was just these 5 topics, which was, decision making in a crisis and problem solving, high performing teams, right? Innovation, the opportunity of change, and leadership. So we realized that, okay, these were the 5 things that we really needed. And also we used to do or maybe we can do a split, right? A 4-hour, online workshop. And then we realized that perhaps it was talking to our clients, we realized that short targeted 1 to 3 hour sessions once a month or one or twice in a month was more helpful than longer workshops in this current time. So we understood the learning needs and how they wanted to learn. And then that's how we started to tweak our offerings, and we decided to really just focus on what did our best clients really need. And once we were able to understand that, then we were able to really structure our online offerings in a way which which they believe really helped them through this period.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Quite a few of the discussions actually centered on, to survive, you really need to understand what your customers are thinking and what do they really need and how do we serve to that purpose. We have a question from Dave. He's asking, can you advise what skill sets are important for a young leader to develop during this difficult period?
I see. I think, leadership, right? It's such it's such a big word.
Yes.
Under leadership, there are just so many different skill sets, from communication to making decisions and innovating and winning. But if I go back, okay, to what is the fundamentals of leadership? How can I put leadership in action? Then I would say, as a young leader, one of the most important things is to understand what does leadership mean in action. And to do that, you need to understand what are the 5 roles of a leader. The first one, as a leader, you are number 1, you play the leader role, where you share your vision and strategy. Number 2, as an inspiring leader, you also play the manager role, right? Where you come up with processes, you do task delegation. Number 3, as a leader, you're also a trainer, right? You build key competencies. Number 4, the 4th role of a leader is that of a coach, right? Coaching, building confidence in your team. And the 5th one is that of a mentor, where you share experiences. Now, I think as a leader, as a young leader, if you are able to understand that leadership is about being able to do these 5 roles, it will be very helpful, because you will then be able to tailor-make your leadership style to the needs of that person, of the team that you're leading at that point in time. So, for example, in this crisis time, you're speaking to an experienced leader, but you're sensing that, he's suddenly, losing confidence, perhaps because his sales has dropped. But he has been an excellent sales leader. He's done very well. So, which hat would you pull out? Will you pull out the manager hat? Would you pull out the leader hat? There are no right or wrong answers. But for me personally, I'll pull out the coach hat, right? It's building the confidence. All he needs is, that confidence to say that you've done this before, let's reframe the situation. Let's continue to build the conference. Another example is if you meet somebody who is calling in late for a video conference call every time, right? Then which toolkit do you pull out? Do you pull out the manager? Do you pull out the coach? Do you pull out the mentor? So for me, I would probably pull out the manager role, right? Which is, you're late. Why is that so? So I think as a leader in these crisis times, especially, It's understanding and adapting our leadership styles, knowing what does that individual in that specific moment requires from me in order for him to feel engaged and for me to be able to keep him motivated. So I would say understanding what are the roles, which tool to pull out at what point in time would be critical for any time as a leader, whether in a crisis or, when things are nice and rosy.
That's a good way of putting it. So I think some others call it situational leadership as well, pulling out whether you're a manager, a coach, or competency. So thank you so much, Wendy. Now, switching gears a little bit, I would like to basically ask you, I think we had this conversation when we were doing the recording, was that in times like this, right, a lot of people will be at crossroads, being pushed to make a particular decision, either because they have to take on a new role, because their existing role is made redundant, or that they have to decide whether do they still want to go the career path like they used to plan. So I think you had one interesting experience, which I thought would be quite useful to share here. Maybe you could share a little bit more.
Great. I see Dave. Dave, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, we say thanks again for your tips, and I will start looking at the hats I have to wear.
Now, these are looking at the hats. Maybe you can, choose on a video conference which colored hat represents which role. But yes, thank you for the question, Dave. And to answer your question, Janet, yes. As we were chatting, I shared with you a personal story of an experience that I had. So a couple of years back, due to personal reasons, I had to move to Dubai, make a move to Dubai. And at that time, I had just joined, this organization, and I was extremely fulfilled and happy in this role. I had a great team, I had a great boss. I loved what I was doing. And then I had to move to Dubai. So what happened was I was kind of at a crossroads, right? In my mind, I only had two options. One was to leave my job, right, and go to Dubai. The other one was to stay in my marriage, right? Because my husband was there, and then or leave my husband, right? So it's either leave my job or leave my husband. In my mind, these were the two options. But I remember, and so I was mulling over this decision with my husband at that time. And he suddenly just said to me, why, if you could have it, right, why are you thinking of these two options? If you could have it, what's your most desired outcome? And that's when I thought about it. And I said, oh, what's my most desired outcome? It's actually if I can keep my job and continue to stay in the marriage. And what would that look like? And what it looked like was being able to shuttle between the two countries at that point in time, because I extremely loved my job and I also loved my husband at that time. And so he asked me, why don't you ask your boss if that's possible? And so I thought about it and I said, okay, I plucked up my courage at that point in time. So I plucked up my courage and I asked my boss, and he said, that's a good idea, but we've never done it before. But let me see what can be done. And so a couple of maybe 1 or 2 weeks passed, and my boss came back to me and he said that, yes, actually I spoke with our HR business partner, looking at taxes, looking at all the laws and regulations, looking at your work contract, and we believe that this can be done. And so what happened was I was able to commute between Singapore and Dubai, 6 weeks in Singapore, 4 weeks in Singapore, 6 weeks in Dubai, and I shuttled between these two countries. And I also had a very supportive team. So Dubai is 4 hours behind Singapore. So my team was really sweet. They said that, okay, if we need Wendy, the earliest that she will come on is 10 a.m. Singapore time, which is 6 a.m. Dubai time, which is still a time when I can still wake up and have productive conversations. So this really taught me that very often we always, make very binary decisions. But sometimes you ask yourself, even if you're in time of crisis, you've been retrenched, right? You ask yourself, like, what's the opportunity here? Of course, what's the first thing? What's the opportunity here? And what is the most desirable outcome out of this? And then have that courage to ask your boss or manager or somebody, right, who can make the decision, share with them your desired outcome. And you never know, right? You never know what happens, right? Because I think, you hear a lot of people ask, if you ask, what's the worst that can happen? If you can deal with that, then go ahead, take the courage and just shoot.
Yes.
So, yes.
Thank you for sharing, Wendy. So, and I totally agree. Basically, sometimes we get stuck in a certain perspective because we're viewing things only from our lens. And then just by talking to different people, it actually provides us with different perspectives. And in this case, like what you said, because you had the discussion with your husband, so it opened up another perspective. And I think the next step is actually having that particular courage to be able to plug that up. Now, I think a lot of us, especially maybe we can talk about Singapore, we grew up in a pretty protected environment. So therefore, at times, having this particular courage can be not as easily done. So would you have any tips that you can share to have someone like plug up and say, yes, I will do this change, or yes, I will look at it from a different perspective, or even speaking up?
Courage. Well, what would I? That's an interesting question about, like, how can we build up the courage, right, to go and ask? I think for me personally, I think it's two things. Firstly, you need to know what you want. Firstly, you need to know what you want. That's number one. Number two, as you write down what you want, think about the two extremes. What's the worst that can happen and what's the best that can happen? Very often, what happens will lie between these two extremes, right? Now, if you are able to think about, okay, when you look at the negative extreme, what's the worst that can happen? And if you can find a way to mitigate it, then I believe that in itself, having that clarity and having an action plan gives you that courage or gives you that confidence to go and ask, because you already know that, okay, in the extreme, if this happens, right, there are two things. One is I can either control it or I can't control it. What can I control? What can I do? And then you determine if you would still like to go ahead with that action plan that you wish to. That's one. Number two, I would say, is to talk to somebody that you trust. Very often in leadership, in high performance, I think if you ask any successful leader, they very often have their own personal board of directors, right? People who they trust that can provide them with honest, authentic feedback. And yeah, they're able, and as a person, they're also able to receive that feedback. They trust that person has their intentions at heart. So I think being able to ask your personal board of directors, right, finding out what they would do, because they might provide you with options or a different way of thinking that you might not have thought before. So the idea is not to ask every single Tom, Dick, and Harry, but only your trusted inner circle, your personal board of directors. And I think the moment you speak it out, sometimes speaking out is a way of accountability also. And I think when you do that, that also allows you to, gives you that confidence and that courage. And the third and the last one is to find a coach. Very often you think, people think that, only when I'm like, it's only when I'm in a crisis or I need something, then I go for a coach. But very often having a good coach or a good mentor is one way to provide you with a clarity of thought. Because I can also understand in a crisis when you are retrenched, it is difficult. It is not easy to, come out of it, because there are so many ways that we fall into our own mental traps. Very often, as human beings, we tend to either blame ourselves, sometimes we blame others, or we catastrophize, right? Like, well, it's just we dig a deeper hole for ourselves. So I think sometimes if all else fails, like just go and look for a coach. A good coach will be able to provide that clarity of thought for you and gives you that confidence to encourage.
Thank you, Wendy. So, Wendy, I'm going to hide you for a little while and I'll show the episode as well as how they can contact you, and then I'll come back to you again.
Okay.
So, similarly, you can go to effectiveasianleadership.com, click on the page on Leadership During Crisis, and you see all the various different episodes. And when you scroll all the way to Wendy's episode at the bottom, okay, you can click on the blue button. And once you click on the blue button, you come to this page, which shows her episode, as well as more about Wendy. And there will be an episode premiere, which was the recorded episode that we had. And the Q&A session is actually on the blue button. When it's edited, you'll be uploaded as well. So when you scroll further down, you read more about Wendy and how you can contact her at Influence Solutions. And because this particular series that we have a total of more than 30 episodes. So we have actually categorized it on the learning.corporatetrainerconnect.com, where you can then sign up for the series, watch it either from a overcoming personal crisis perspective, whether it's emotional or business, or you can watch it actually from a business category where you're looking at it from a leadership communication or future strategies. So in these learning.corporatetrainerconnect.com platform, there are various different courses as well on leadership, as well as emotional resilience and on motivation. And if you scroll all the way down, you will see the Leadership During Crisis Summit series. You can click on it, and from there, basically, it's also freely available for you, but you can choose it by categories. So let me get back to Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Hey, I'm back.
Yeah, you're back. Switching back and forth. And it's 2:34. Time really flies. Thank you so much for your time.
Janet.
Taking a Saturday afternoon to share your insights and experience.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much for organizing this, for your time as well. Do stay well and keep healthy. And for everyone out there also, do keep well and stay healthy.
Yeah. Thank you for all those who have stayed with us throughout, and goodbye.
Bye.